All right, welcome back to ABA exam review and the continuation of our RBT practice question series, where we're going through another set of questions together and breaking them down. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Please like and subscribe. Check out btexamreview.com for all of our study materials, including our combo pack. When you pass your exam, let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. Let's get going. A therapist is tracking how long a client remains engaged with the puzzle. In one session, the client begins working, pauses for 10 seconds, and then continues. The therapist restarts the timer each time the client resumes, adding up all engagement periods over 10 minutes. What is the most accurate statement about this approach? All right, so let's think about this approach. We're clearly measuring something. Now, in the question, it says the therapist is tracking how long a client is engaged. So when you think about measurement, we're typically measuring the length of time or the amount of something. And so if you have a question about measurement that is talking about how long something occurred or how often, that's usually a pretty good giveaway about what you should be thinking. If it says how long the client was engaged, we should start thinking time. So some sort of time measurement. Now, in this case, the client is working and then pauses for 10 seconds and then continues. The therapist is stopping the timer and then only resuming the timer or restarting the timer when the client is working. So essentially, the therapist over 10 minutes is doing what? They're timing how long that client worked throughout the entire 10 minutes. So, what could you say about this approach? A, the therapist is using partial interval recording. Well, the therapist is not using interval recording because they're going the full 10 minutes and continuously recording every time the client is working. That's a big difference between continuous and discontinuous measurement, with partial interval being a discontinuous measurement. In this case, 10 minutes is the measurement time, and the therapist is recording every time the client is engaged throughout the whole 10 minutes. B, this is a continuous measurement system that captures the total time the behavior occurs. Sure, it is continuous measurement, and it's going to capture how long the behavior occurred, how long the client is engaged. They're going to add up at the end how long the engagement lasted. So B looks pretty good. C, the method measures the frequency of puzzle use. Well, we're not measuring frequency, right? Frequency is a count. It's going to be how many the therapist is tracking, how long. And then D, the system is best described as latency recording. What does latency measure? Latency measures the time in between the SD and the first response. The therapist is not measuring how long it takes for the client to become engaged, for instance. They're measuring total time engaged. So the best answer here is B. This is a continuous measurement system that captures the total time the behavior occurs. While playing with a peer, a client observes the peer clapping hands and immediately begins clapping too. This behavior was not prompted and had not been explicitly taught. Which characteristic of imitation does this demonstrate? So I made it a little more challenging in terms of imitation, because imitation is pretty straightforward, right? Your learner copies you immediately, not too hard. Now, in this case, we've got to think a little more about what characteristic are we actually looking at. And it's not going to be the most challenging question. It's just presented or asked in a more difficult way. So if this client is playing with a peer, sees the peer clap their hands, and immediately begins clapping too, that's pretty obvious imitation because the behavior was not prompted and it's not taught. So why do we think it's imitation? What about this scenario makes it imitation? A, the behavior was functionally equivalent but served a different purpose. Well, that would make sense. If it's functionally equivalent, it's not going to happen for a different reason. So A just fundamentally is wrong. B, the behavior occurred after repeated prompting and shaping. Well, we know from the question it says the behavior was not prompted. And with imitation, we're not prompting and shaping it, right? Imitation needs to occur immediately. C, the behavior followed the model closely in both topography and timing. Perfect. The client clapped just like the peer, and it happened immediately. Two sure signs of imitation. If the topography or the look is the same, and it happens immediately after the model, and the model in this case is the appear. So C looks good. D, the behavior was reinforced before the model occurred. Well, we don't know that, right? We've never taught it. We've never prompted it. And there's nothing saying it was reinforced. So maybe it was, but there's no information indicating that. Our information says that C is the best answer. The behavior followed the model closely in both topography and timing. A child has learned that screaming while in line at the grocery store often leads to getting candy. A parent decides to no longer provide candy in response to screaming. On the next shopping trip, the child screams louder, kicks the cart, and cries more intensely than usual. What should the parent expect if extinction is implemented correctly from this point forward? So we have an extinction question. With extinction, we're withholding reinforcement for a previously reinforced behavior. In this case, the child screams to do what? To get candy. So the function of the behavior is tangible. And when we're doing extinction, function is very important because function is going to tell us what we need to withhold. So if the child is screaming to get the tangible candy, we've got to withhold the candy. And that's what the parent does. They don't provide candy in response. What happens? Child screams louder, kicks cart, cries more intensely. Why? Well, that's our extinction burst, right? What happens when we do extinction effectively? Well, the behavior is going to temporarily increase before it gets better. That's the expected extinction burst. So if we know all this, what should the parent, if you had to tell the parent what to expect from this point forward, what would you say about this extinction procedure? A, the child's behavior will remain at this high level due to loss of reinforcement. Just the opposite, right? We would say this looks like an extinction burst and we can expect this to stop at some point. B, these behaviors are signs of ineffective extinction and indicate the need to stop the plan. Just the opposite. These behaviors look like pretty good signs of effective extinction. We should continue with the plan. C, the increase in intensity is temporary and expected. The behavior should decrease with continued non-reinforcement. Perfect. We expect the increase at first. We are then going to expect it to go back down until it's gone. Continue as is. Do not provide reinforcement. D, the child is engaging in attention-seeking behavior, so candy removal is irrelevant. Well, we already determined that getting candy was the function, so we're not just going to change the function all of a sudden, right? Function's already been decided. Notice we read every answer choice no matter what, okay? And then we walk through why the wrong answers are wrong. It's just as important to know why something's wrong as it is to know why something is correct. Our correct answer is C. The increase in intensity is temporary and expected. The behavior should decrease with continued non-reinforcement. A therapist is tracking whether a child remains seated during a group activity. The therapist observes for 10-second interval and records yes only if the child stays seated for the entire 10 seconds. What is the most accurate statement about this data collection method? So we changed it up a little bit, right? We had a measurement question earlier that had to do with a full time period. And in that time, we said, well, it can't be intervals because we didn't break it into intervals. However, here, right, we are using 10-second intervals and records yes only if the child stays seated the entire 10 seconds. This looks like clear whole interval recording. Whole interval recording, the behavior must happen the entire interval to count. Exactly what we're measuring here. Now, what would you say about this data collection method? A, it likely underestimates the actual occurrence of behavior. If we had 10 intervals and the behavior would have to happen for the entire 10-second interval to count, would that underestimate or overestimate behavior? We'll likely underestimate because if the behavior happens for 9 seconds in whole interval, we're not going to count it. So whole interval is much more likely to underestimate behavior than it is to B, overestimate. Again, if the behavior happens 9 seconds, our data will indicate that no behavior occurred at all. That's going to underestimate. C, it measures latency to respond within each interval. We're not measuring latency, we're using whole interval recording. D, it is the most accurate method for low frequency behaviors. Whole interval is not great for low frequency behaviors because that behavior has to happen again the entire 10 seconds to count. So this is a high level interval recording question. Work on this one until you understand why A is the right answer. If you can, you're really going to understand whole interval recording. Most accurate statement, it likely underestimates actual occurrence of behavior. During snack time, a therapist shows a client how to open a juice box by performing each step slowly and clearly. After watching the client successfully opens their own juice box for the first time, this method of instruction is best described as what? Okay, I read that too quickly. It happens as well. After watching, the client successfully opens their own juice box for the first time. What did the client watch? Well, the client watched the therapist do what? How to open the juice box by performing each step slowly and clearly. So we had an imitation question earlier. What instruction is used in imitation? Well, this one's pretty easy, right? If the client is watching the therapist and then does it, what is the therapist doing? A, shaping. The therapist is not reinforcing approximations. Don't confuse performing each step slowly and clearly as shaping or chaining. The therapist is modeling for the client because the client is imitating that model. And then D, prompt fading. There's no signs of prompts here. It's not going to be prompt fading. Pretty straightforward question. Client imitated the therapist. When imitation is involved, the therapist is using modeling. Thanks for watching. Check out btexamreview.com for all of our study materials. When you pass your exam, let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard, and see you soon.